Testing.
Derek wants you to call.
Okay. Is this working? Okay. How about now? All right, so let's move on to the next. Oh, and this is just an example of the survey forms that were prepared back in the 1997 to 2001 document effort. And so we have these older document for each of the properties that we're looking at again. So if we go to the next slide now. So the purpose of this reconnaissance survey is to verify the presence of 154 buildings and structures that were previously identified as eligible for the National Register back in that earlier effort. There were, as you may recall from the previous slide, 165 that were identified as eligible for the National Register, but 11 have already been designated to the Palo Alto Historic Inventory in the intervening years, and so we're not looking at those ones. Of these properties, about 80% are residential and about 20% are non-residential. So that includes some commercial buildings and even I think like a bridge and a viaduct and a couple of other interesting property types. In addition to looking at these properties that were previously identified in 1997 to 2001, we're also verifying the presence of 16 properties that were found eligible for the California Register of Historical Resources through individual historic resource evaluations that were prepared by qualified architectural historian consultants in more recent years. So this is part of the same effort. So we're going back out and just taking a look at those, although there's less possibility that change has occurred in the last 5 or so years since those properties were identified. So we are going out onto the streets to see if the properties remain eligible as historic resources. And then ultimately the purpose of this effort is to nominate those properties that appear to remain historic resources to the Palo Alto Historic Inventory as Category 1 or Category 2 properties. And we'll explain a little bit more about that on the next slides. And here are just a couple of examples of properties that we're looking at. We haven't come to final conclusions about them. So any of the images that you see in this presentation are just kind of representative of those that are on this list that we are resurveying. So if you're not familiar with the Palo Alto Historic Inventory, it's been around since 1979 when that first historic survey was undertaken. It's the official list of noteworthy historic sites, buildings, structures, and districts that are significant for their design, original owners or historic occupants, historic events, and local traditions that are important to the city of Palo Alto's history. Properties have been added through a nomination procedure that's outlined in Palo Alto's Historic Preservation Ordinance, and it involves the Historic Resources Board, the HRB, as well as the City Council. And there are criteria outlined in their designation procedures, as well as the categories of significance that are available on the city's website if you'd like to look up more information after this presentation. We have a little bit more, though, on the next couple of slides. So just to talk a little bit more about the two categories of the Palo Alto Historic Inventory that we will be considering for whether these properties that were identified as eligible for the National Register would also be eligible to be nominated to the local inventory. So category 1 is exceptional building, and this means that the property has preeminent national or state importance. It's a meritorious work of the best architects that we're practicing here in Palo Alto. It's an outstanding example of stylistic development of architecture in the United States, and that there are no exterior modifications or very minor ones. So the overall appearance of the building represents its original character. So the cream of the crop. And you can tell that the images that we put in this slide are not necessarily associated with category 1. We'll go to the next. And then category 2 is just a half step below a major building. This still has major regional importance. It's a meritorious work of the best architects. It's an outstanding example of an architectural style or stylistic development of architecture in the state or region. And it may have some exterior modifications over the years, but in general, the overall character is retained. We didn't put them in slides, but there are categories 3 and 4, which are more about contextual character in a neighborhood. And it is possible that some of these properties that were previously identified as eligible for the National Register may, when we kind of do the comparison exercise, we may decide that they are actually more aligned with category 3 and 4, and that might be a future effort to nominate those at a little bit of a lower level to the inventory. But right now we're trying to kind of find the cream of the crop and nominate those to the local inventory. And some of that might just be changes in best practices and understanding the criteria of significance over time between when properties were identified around 2000 and today. Go to the next. And in case you're curious, there are incentives for property owners who own historic resources. There is a streamlined project review process after designation on the historic inventory. Property owners will not need to pay for a historic resource evaluation of their property if they propose a project that involves a discretionary planning department review. And the city will also provide treatment guidance that will support development of a proposed exterior alteration project. In addition, the Palo Alto Building Code and Palo Alto Municipal Code offer some development incentives. There's more information about these things on the project website. There's an FAQ as well as in other places on the city's website. And if you have questions at the end of this meeting about any of these things, I think Amy can dive a little bit more into detail about them as well. So this is a high level overview. There's an opportunity to use the more flexible California Historical Building Code. There are some ways that the California Historical Building Code compared to the standard building code can allow for some flexibility in meeting code requirements if you have a historic building and you want to make some changes. There's an option for historic buildings that are in R1 zoned parcels to create a flag lot in exchange for placing the preservation covenant on a historic building. And this isn't necessarily allowed for other properties. So it's an exception, kind of a benefit of having a historic building. There's more you can do with your property potentially. And business or income producing properties may be able to apply for federal historic tax credits. So just a standard residence is not eligible, but if you do have a residence and you rent it to tenants, it might be able to apply for this tax credit. I'm going to hand it over to Barrett.
See this works. So as Amy said at the beginning, my name is Barrett Ryder. I work at Page and Turnbull, where I'm an architectural historian, and I'm one of the primary staff people on this project. I also was one of the 2 people going out and doing the survey work. So I have seen a lot of these buildings in person, and I've previously done a lot of work just in Palo Alto. So we definitely love working down here. I'm just going to cover kind of the survey methodology, and then at the end there also is a schedule. So these 4 set of bullets will kind of tie into that as more of a schedule. So the thing we started off with was setup. We reviewed the previous documentation, all of that information from the 2001 final survey. We looked at that list of properties. We identified which ones had already been listed to the historic inventory. And so then those 11 properties dropped off and we just moved forward with 154. From that list, we then created a mobile survey application so we could go out in the field with our phones and take photos and just kind of write out relevant information that we saw, whether things had been altered, whether the building was in nearly the same exact condition as that 2001 photo that was from the previous documentation. And that allowed us to go out and do the field work, which is the second step on this, the reconnaissance survey. So that was field work that we actually have already completed. We did that over the last 2 weeks, kind of earlier in April. 2 of us were out over 3 days, just kind of hitting every property we could, getting a new photo, marking those alterations down. And then that we made kind of an initial assessment in the field, whether the building was gone, it was demolished, whether it had been altered, or whether it appeared to be very similar to that initial photo. And so we made that initial assessment in the app, and then we're moving into the next phase, which is the analysis. There, we're going to review the documentation we got in the field with that previous documentation, make sure that we're making an informed decision about whether the building has been altered, and then create the survey report that will formalize our findings and identify what the treatment has been to these properties.
Are you asking all questions at the end versus?
Yes.
Yeah,
That would be helpful.
yeah. Happy to like dive into any of these things in much more detail. So, and then that last step, which is the fourth bullet point at the bottom, is the nomination and designation of eligible properties. So these are going to be those criteria or category 1 and category 2 properties that Christina was just discussing. And of course, we're going to have that list of properties that we think are moving forward into that process, and that will be brought to a second community meeting that we're also going to discuss. Next slide. So this just shows a little bit of the prior documentation. On the left, you can see the California State Department of Parks and Recreation, or DPR form. One of these was created for each of those 165 properties. We have copies of those. And they include some basic information like address, parcel number, year built, but they also include information that has a description, it has a photo, and it also discusses why the property would be eligible for the National Register. So we're reviewing those. We actually had this first page in the field with us, so we could refer to that while looking at the building in its current setting, its current condition. And then the middle box, the 2023 survey data, shows a screenshot of one portion of what the mobile survey app looks like, where you start to enter information, you take that first photo as well as a couple other photos. And then there's also 2 examples of photos that I took. I actually had to take those with a camera because the building's very hard to get to. But those you link into the survey app itself. So it creates a complete record of the building in 2023 for us to refer to. And then taking those 2 different types of documentation, that's where the analysis comes in, and we make our finding on the far right, whether it retains eligibility and significance or has lost eligibility. Next slide. So I just wanted to present some preliminary findings. These, of course, we're going to go much more in depth into. This was really just me sorting data from our initial fieldwork. So as we talked about, 11 have been listed to the historic inventory. 11 have been demolished. So 11 buildings have been lost of that initial number. 10 have been significantly altered, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're no longer historic or have integrity. In one case, this includes the Alta Mesa Cemetery. There have been some significant alterations to buildings there, but of course the cemetery is still historic and has integrity. So those 10 properties that have been altered, we will definitely dive deeper into to understand where that threshold of eligibility and integrity is. And then 1 property has been damaged. It looks like a tree fell through one recently. So once you kind of weed out those initial properties, some will kind of go back and forth, but at least 132 appear to still have some historic integrity and significance. So those are the 132 that we're really going to move forward with to understand where they are in terms of a category 1, a category 2, or whether they would be more of a category 3 or 4. So that's where that process starts to happen, and we move into that creating these nomination packages to move some properties forward for listing to the inventory.
I think it'd be if you can read the definition of historic integrity, since we've been using that term.
Yeah.
And that might be helpful too.
Right now, or
yeah, or I can do it.
Oh, it's up there.
So in case you're wondering, in historic preservation, with the National Register of Historic Places, when you're nominating a property, and the same is for the California Register of Historical Resources, and local, we look at two things. Does a property have historic significance within the context of its development? It could be a good example of an architectural style or a particular architect. It could represent an important event or an important person. So as long as you have the historic documentation to back that up, you can make those kinds of findings of significance. And then in addition to significance, a property must retain enough historic integrity. And what integrity is the ability of a property to convey its historic significance through its physical characteristics. So that means that enough of the building retains its appearance from that period in which it was found significant. We call it the period of significance. That somebody from that period, let's say, would look at the building and still recognize it. It hasn't been changed too much. So it maintains enough physical characteristics, materials, the design, workmanship, and even some less tangible things called feeling and association, that you can kind of connect the significance to what the building looks like today. So what we're doing as we're going out and surveying, we're looking at whether the properties have been altered to the extent that they no longer represent that period of significance. So if the property was identified as significant for its architectural style, its design, but it's been altered a lot, then it doesn't have that ability to represent that significance anymore. Or if it was found significant for a particular person or event from some time period, but again, it's been altered so that it doesn't look like it did during that time period, then it may not be eligible anymore. So that's kind of the exercise we're doing right now, is seeing compared to when these were reviewed in 2001, and they likely had enough integrity at that time to be identified as eligible. Can we still say that today? So hopefully that's helpful to explain.
Yeah, and this is also where our analysis, we will dive back into what the actual language was of identifying the building as significant and its evaluation that was included on those DPR forms, because that often tells you whether it was significant for its association and what particular element of that association. A couple properties were significant as like one of the last examples of an extant farmhouse in Palo Alto, things like that, where we want to really understand why the property is significant, why it was first called out, and then make sure that that carries through to today. Next slide, please. And then this is just a quick project schedule. We started the project in March, having just initial conversations and starting to review a lot of the background data. And then the field survey really occurred in early April. We got our data together, we went out in the field, we collected that. And then you have us here today at community meeting number 1. There will be a second one in September. And this is just to introduce the project, get your initial thoughts, answer initial questions, and kind of get a feel for how this project is moving forward. We are starting the analysis and survey report phase, and that will start at the end of this month and go through June. We'll issue that survey report to the city with some of our initial findings, recommendations, thoughts about what has occurred with those historic properties in the last 22 years. And then the bulk of the summer, really June through September, is that sorting of the higher category buildings and the preparation of those nominations. And that's where we'll really start to have a list of what properties we think will move forward with the nomination process and which might be revisited later. And that's where in September, we think we will have this second community meeting to really show those results, get your thoughts, and have that chance to have a conversation about the process. And then through the end of the year will be the designation hearings and that sort of outreach. So we hope to wrap up everything before the end of the year. Of course, that is also based on scheduling of those hearings, but that is the goal. Next slide. And then this is just a kind of a list of links. They all go to the website, but this is the project website, which hopefully you all have seen, have clicked around. There is a copy of the map that looks similar to the one over there with all of the properties pinpointed. You can look and see which criteria each building was found eligible under on that map. And there's also a link to the frequently asked questions and some of the work that we pulled together on the preservation incentives that are already on the city's website. And then there also is a contact form, so you can reach out to Amy with any of your questions. And we would, of course, welcome that feedback. And then we have time for questions now, which is the next slide.
Amy, do you have anything else you want to add before we get into questions that we might have missed in the overview?
Yeah, I mean, I think you captured it. I mean, obviously, this is not a quick turnaround process, but it is, you know, fairly in as city processes go, it's fairly quick, considering we're hoping to get through it this year and not extend it out into future years. So with that, I think we can begin to hear from our participants.
Yes, my first question about the survey process, obviously it's listed several times that you viewed it from the right of way externally. What if we would like you to take a look at the 360 of the property? Because if you're going to do a second analysis, you're only looking from the street. You know, obviously there's more to a house than just the front. So
yeah, well, I know that there's definitely a couple properties that were very difficult to see from the street. And I think this is a conversation that we probably should have as well about if there are a couple cases where it makes sense to go and view them off of the public right of way. But part of it is that the historic resources, part of how historic resources are protected is they are part of the value of the community, and the community views them from the public right of way. So there is just kind of more significance placed on the front facing portion of a resource and how the public is able to perceive it and how it supports that community feeling and community value. I don't know if there's anything else.
Procedural question. If the meeting's being recorded, if one of you is going to answer the question, if you can repeat the question so it can be recorded, or the person who's asking the question, they can be on a mic, then that way the meeting really is recorded. Thank you.
Guess you missed that one, but
I just follow that up. So I have the report from 1999, I think it was. And for our house, it seems like the designation is a conjecture. It's like a lot of like, this might have been whatever. And part of the conjecture is that the barn that used to be at the back of our house, which was an amazing 2-story beautiful barn, is there. And that's, and if it's there then, and the barn, there's nothing there. So that, I mean, that's sort of relevant to, like, I mean, I don't know how you maybe your focus can look, but that's like one of the big deals that they're making, and it's like it's completely not accurate.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of why we want to have this second community meeting, where if your property is one of the ones that we are moving forward through the nomination procedure, you have a chance to correct some of those issues. I have also read that form, and I know that it says like if it is there, and those are things that we would definitely try to confirm before moving forward with. And so
do you want us to tell you stuff like that? Like, I mean, I can answer.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Like,
if you have direct feedback that is a factual inaccuracy on those DPR forms, that's something that you could definitely send an email, supply us with that information, and that can help inform our analysis.
So what email should he address? Where should he send it? Amy, do we need to set one out?
Yes, my name is Isabel Castellano, and I'm part of the consultancy with M Group, and that's the assistance that I'm providing. Any communication or additional information you'd like to receive, that's part of the contact, and it would be directly to me, and I would be coordinating with the city and with the consultants. And that's helpful if you were to complete the contact form that we have online or connect with me via email. I've shared with the group today some information and sheets if you'd like to connect with me on a specific question. But we're trying to answer all the questions you might have specifically to your property, and we're willing to have that conversation with you and extending with the details that might overlap on details for, as you mentioned, with the barn or things that might not be existing. So that's part of the conversation from today's community meeting and to the second one, how we can communicate with the property owners. And if you'd like additional information, we're here to provide that for you as well.
So where do I find it?
That's on the website as well, the survey project. There's a contact form at the bottom. If you put your name and information, I'd be reaching out to you shortly. Thanks.
And we're not really scoped to do additional historic research, but we do have some tools that we can use to confirm a few things, kind of like your example, where we can look at Google aerial photos. You know, we have tools that we use pretty often when we're doing historic resource evaluations, when we can't see everything on a property. And so, you know, especially with yours, since the red flag goes up with the if, I think we would verify that via a few online tools anyway.
Could you describe what a designation hearing is? You mentioned it several times, though, the designation hearing, so maybe if you could explain what takes place at the designation hearing.
So this would be the as set forth in the municipal code. It would be first hearing before the Historic Resources Board, where materials would be brought forward and discussed with the Historic Resources Board, and then there would be that would be the first of the hearings, and then there would be a hearing with the City Council where they would receive the recommendations from the Historic Resources Board and professional staff as to whether, you know, these properties remain eligible and are recommended for nomination, and then it would be the council decision. Hearings are, you know, public hearings. This is a community meeting, so it's less a public hearing. You know, it's more formal in the council chambers with, you've been to the HRB meetings virtually, I guess, but we also have it in person. So they would be hybrid meetings.
It would be a public comment. I just want to make sure I understand. They're going to list all our houses, they're going to say all the results, and we will get a 2-minute public comment. Is that what the hearing is, or is it interactive, or is it different than that? I guess.
Yeah, we haven't done it in this city that I've been involved in. So you know, this is back a ways back when such hearings, and it wasn't so many properties, it was, you know, one at a time. So I can't give you firsthand.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of complicated. All
Yeah,
30
yeah.
people have, you know.
I don't think it would be one hearing with the HRB with all 132 properties. We would break it up into, you know, multiple batches. Yeah, batches.
Two different HRB.
More than two.
Yeah.
Yeah, to subdivide that long list, you know, let's say it's 132, let's say it goes down to 120, just for rounding. And, you know, we might have 4 hearings and each one of those has 30. But suffice it to say, I don't think limiting people to 2 minutes who are the property owners is something we would be advocating. But we'll work on it. I mean, again, there's opportunity to go back and forth.
It's great. I think it's so that we all have our expectations
Sure.
and we understand what our opportunity is to speak. I think it's part of the expectations that. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you're.
I guess I want to encourage, before we get to those hearings, to have, this is what this dialogue is for, is to try to, you know, hear and work through it even before we get to the HRB nomination hearings.
There is some ambiguity in the language at different places on the website. In some places it says it's going to be nominated by the city. You know, is that council or is that staff and consultant? In other places it says the HRB will make the recommendation and then the council will decide. So I think we want to know exactly, does the staff, and I think saying the word city, it should be more specific. If it's staff and the consultant, they're going to make a proposal to the HRB. Great, that's the process. HRB makes a recommendation, the recommendation goes to the council, and the council makes a decision. I just, if we get some clarity on that, who the decision makers are and approvals, it's useful to understand who we're supposed to be going to for our input.
Great comment. Thank you. I think you described it perfectly.
So from reading about this in the press, I was under the impression that you guys we're going to be looking at buildings to nominate them to the national register. And so I'm a bit, so this is purely about choosing whether the buildings that were potentially eligible for the National California Register, but weren't put on the Palo Alto Register, see if they should go on the Palo Alto Register. Is that right?
Yes, just the one caveat is this word potentially.
Right.
So the ones that we're looking at here were not potentially eligible. They were determined to be eligible at that time in 2000 to 2001. So they've already been determined eligible back then. We're making sure they're still
Right.
determined eligible. And then we'll, look
Well,
towards.
except like the report is full of these conditionals. It's like, if it was built by the guy who lived there, which it wasn't, then, so it just seems like,
Right.
I mean, so it was actually eligible.
It was determined eligible back in the day, but it was never, I mean, with the city doesn't submit nominations to the
Right.
National Register to put
Right.
local houses on the National Register. We just don't do that. That's up to the property owner if they want to.
That's going to remain.
And yeah, we're not,
Okay.
that's not what this exercise is.
Okay. 'Cause
It's strictly,
that was actually, some of the press that I read implied that was the case. The city was going to be putting
oh,
people's houses of nominating people's houses for them to the National Register.
okay. So that
That's-
was a
that is-
news article by somebody,
Oh.
yeah.
One of the local unreliable, whatever.
Okay.
No, this is exactly what I wanted.
Yeah.
Curious to
I-
get clear.
And I think the idea of looking at those that were found eligible for the National Register before is that hopefully they are, they rise to a level of significance that will make them pretty easy to still be found historically significant within Palo Alto's history and eligible for the local register instead. So kind of, looking at the top cut that had been identified 20 years ago.
Just to clarify, the motion that the council passed was to make recommendations on the inventory. And then on the letter that we received, it says that the project is to designate them to the Palo Alto history. It sounds like you were doing it versus the process that I'm hearing at this meeting. The language is not aligned, I guess. Sure.
I understand. Yeah, the code language from the Palo Alto Municipal Code is nominations. So that's whenever it says designations, that's nominations.
Okay.
And the council would be the decision maker, correct? Yeah, after all is said and done.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question about that same matter? I mean, does the homeowner have any right in deciding whether their house should be nominated? I mean, can they say, I'd rather not have you nominate my house? Or is that not an issue? That's not a choice of the homeowner.
The homeowner is involved in this process, of course, expressing opinions and desires and wishes and whatever, any way you slice it. You're involved in the process as a homeowner. We don't have a similar statement like they do at the state level of, the homeowner needs to be on board with a nomination. So that's not written in our code that way. But we have a council that is very receptive to the constituents. And so I don't see, it's awkward for me to say, well, nobody has to be listed on the inventory. I mean, that I think this process is to try to help people understand the advantages of being on the inventory, the incentives, maybe look at our incentives, maybe see what else is out there that we can provide as incentives. This is a process that may extend beyond this particular effort.
Thank you.
It's my time?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'd
You
go
want
ask
to
you,
turn on the
do
mic over there today? Thanks.
you have any city council here? On
No.
this meeting,
We have not brought the city council. It's still early days.
again?
It is early days, so we had not asked council members to come. So this is just the first meeting.
Okay, because I wanted to give us some of my opinions what's going on, and unless somebody else was here, maybe I'll do some other time. First of all, like I said, every time we receive things like this, I've been in Palo Alto 50 years and buy property, that, for 50 years. And now last 2 years or 3, 4 years, every time we get one of this, we say, what the city wants to take it from us. This is the feeling that is everywhere. So as soon as we know the city is going to hurt somebody. And this happens every day, every day. About this historical, the reason why you're doing, so you don't have to tell people why. This is just to go around the state law about building, and you want to protect this thing so at least people don't develop. And you pick up the scapegoats to pay for everybody. And that's the story. I have 2 properties here that never been on a list, never been anywhere. Somebody just drive by and think they should be historical. They've been remodeled, redone, moved out, put a different place. And now they, like if they've been on the historical, never been. And both of them, I have a report that they are not historical by any means. One of them is the one next to Casa Real. I have a report of that, was given to the city agreed, and now it's back again. So this is the reason, nothing to do with your house or nothing. They just want to protect some places so you don't develop. This is one of the things. The other thing is, as you know, I don't come in any meeting because I'm just frustrated. I wish I could live in the city, but I'm stuck at I have too many property. I have about at least 100 units around Palo Alto that nobody wants because they're afraid of downtown Palo Alto. I remember the old days when they paid a lot of money to be near downtown. Now everything I have apartment around downtown, they're all vacant. I have about 86 units all around here. Nobody wants to be around downtown for University Avenue, Eldo Street. Crimes, smell, homeless, and that's the only thing you're doing right now. How we can make the city pretty the way it used to be. At one point, it was on the papers, the best city in the country. I'm sure you read about that. Now it's on the bottom of the list. Now everybody talk about beautiful San Carlos, even yourself, the city of Palo, how beautiful Burlingame. This was the most beautiful. That was the most beautiful. I have a 2 vacant building, retail building on University Avenue. I just bought it. I bought it the former Apple building. Nobody wants to be on University Avenue. And now you think about taxing them because they are vacant. They are vacant because of you. Make the city pretty and the people will come. Like this game is not fair. Just obey the law and let the people do what the state of California law says to do. That's it I have to say. I'm frustrated. I love the city. Been my city for 50 years. By the way, I got robbed on my house. I live on the hills. I got robbed on my office. 3 cars of mine that were robbed. 2 vans that got robbed. This is not the city of Palo Alto. I'm just frustrated. I'm afraid to go home. I'm afraid to go to my office. And I have 5 family. I have 5 kids, all married, all living downtown. And we live in fear. And now we talk about historical. Try to clean up the city, please, so leave people alone. Thank you. I wish it was better city. Thank you.
Go ahead. So, he beat me a couple of years. I've been here 48 years. Hard to imagine, but true. Just maybe a couple of things, and if I get something wrong, I'm sure somebody here will, Amy or Christine, will correct me. But cities in California are supposed to update their inventories periodically. I don't know that periodically is specifically identified, but our inventory hasn't been updated since 1979. and we're a CLG, a certified local government. There have been some properties added. But individually and for various reasons, like if they want development rights, you can get because you list yourself on the as to be added to the inventory as a category 1 or 2. Am I correct so far?
That there's no specified period to do.
That periodically the cities are supposed to update their inventory.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Ideally, I think we would have a more citywide update,
Yeah.
for properties 50 years or older. But yeah, it's been,
But 1979 is
that's when the
40, what?
The first and
44
only-
44 years ago.
the first and only citywide survey before the 1998 to 2000 survey, because that was
Right.
a pretty holistic survey.
Right, exactly. You mentioned the incentives, and there are more that I hope people will look at. Obviously, I like preservation. I think it adds to the character of Palo Alto that was recently mentioned. And we've lost a lot of our character because we lost an awful lot of our historic resources, my opinion. But there are a lot of incentives, and the one that Christina mentioned, one of the ones that Christina mentioned about flag lots. What's different about that than what is otherwise available is that those flag lots can be independently owned to each other. So it can be each part of the flag and the front property can both be independently owned. And that's different than other situations. So that's another one. It's puzzling to me, and I'd like to understand this. How if something has been determined eligible for the National Register, two things. One is I understand how something could be demolished because no discretionary review is required for single-story buildings or homes. So I understand that demolition. I don't understand how significant alterations could happen on a National Register identified building because it seems like CEQA would apply, the California Environmental Quality Act. So I don't understand how that could happen. And the other is a clarification, Christina, if you could, and thank you for being here again. You're a staunch supporter of Palo Alto and preservation folks, so thank you for that. You and Paige Turble. If something is eligible for the National Register, I have a hard time understanding why it wouldn't be eligible for or appropriate for a category 1 or 2 listing on our little local inventory.
I think we are expecting that most would be, but there may be some kind of situation like your example where we look at the information that was supplied back around 2000 that supported that finding at the time, and for whatever reason disagree with it now, and so maybe it would drop down to it may still be important or contextually significant to the city of Palo Alto, and may qualify as a 3 or 4, perhaps for even a little bit of a different reason than was identified around 2000. So we just want to leave that option open, that it's possible there's not a 1-to-1 for every property that we look at upon our look again these days using current best practices of evaluation. So that we're hoping that the vast majority will equate to a category 1 or 2.
Thank you for that. And then the other thing is, how could National Register determined eligible properties have lost historic integrity due to significant alterations? Because it seems like CEQA would protect them.
CEQA is not an end-all be-all for every project. For ministerial projects, it doesn't apply. I don't want to get off on that track there right now, because I really want to hear from the owners that have come to this meeting. I don't think we've heard from everyone, so I want to. We do have an hour left to get into some other details about what happens at the building permits in Palo Alto. How do we deal with that? But is there a person that hasn't, or back to anyone that would like to? Okay, we have other people in the room.
Yeah, anyone that hasn't asked a question, please go ahead of me. I have more, but I'm happy to yield to them.
Thank you for asking questions.
Yes.
So I am a property owner. I was surprised that my home was going to be included on this list. I I'm glad I went after the rant because I think he expressed probably highly aggressively a number of the points that homeowners might raise. And I guess I'm trying to be open-minded, but when I hear that my home that I purchased with, when it was not on any sort of registry that I probably wouldn't have purchased if it had been on one, might be added, it's concerning. And I would be surprised if many homeowners who aren't here would have serious concerns about restrictions on their home and the value of their property. And so it would be great. I did read the material that was on the website, but maybe I don't understand the process well enough in Palo Alto to understand the benefits. I think the flag lot benefit sounds like that's a significant potential benefit to a property owner, but if you could talk a little bit about what the benefits are to for remodeling or renovation of a home, and how that could possibly benefit or increase the value of the property.
So there's a number of incentives that are listed on the city's, the department webpage. If you go to the Planning and Development Services Department, and then there's historic preservation, you click on that link. It'll take you to a page that has incentives, which I think is also linked to this project.
I have read that, but
okay,
not having remodeled my home.
Right.
Maybe I can't think of an example. Maybe like
I'll give one example.
That maybe I'm not thinking.
I'll give one example. So what we in Palo Alto, we have a discretionary process that's called home improvement exception. And the home improvement exception enables any home to come forward and ask for additional square footage above and beyond what they're allowed by the zoning code. You have to go through findings and this kind of thing, and you have to save at least 75% of the exterior walls of the home. For a historic category 1 through 4, actually, on our inventory, those properties can have additional square footage above and beyond what the zoning code allows. So that's one example of a perk. It is a process that is a discretionary process. So that's, I guess, a negative, is that it's not just a building permit. We do have to make the findings for that, but there's additional square footage. So that could translate into additional, value or higher cost home if you were to turn around and sell it, if it had additional square footage that a non-historic home would not be able to get.
And that's usually based on lot size.
No, it's
limitation. I'm sorry, for just any normal residence. The size, the square footage is based on lot size.
Yes, so the square footage is based on what we call floor area ratio. And so if you take the area of your home, add it up, 2 floors, you add all that floor area up, divide by the size of the parcel that it's on, and that's your floor area ratio that's existing. Some homes, especially historic homes, some of them exceed that vastly, and others are, not at that level, or some are right at it. And as far as what the code allows, but you can come in with a historic home and request additional floor area beyond what's normally allowed for non-historic homes.
I will also mention that we do a lot of assistance, Page and Turnbull, on project reviews for the city of Palo Alto, where the planners consult with us on projects. And even if you have a historic resource, you can make interior modifications. Typically alterations on the back side of the house, especially if they're not very visible from the public right of way, are allowable. So more of the design review is kind of from the street side. And there are a lot of things you can do with your property that aren't limiting, being a historic resource doesn't limit you from doing things.
And we have a number of homes in town that are on the inventory that have put a second floor. I mean, it's not as limiting as you might think to be a historic resource. We have what's called the Secretary of Interior Standards that is a march through the list and see, you know, how it could be. Sometimes, you know, building, somebody will add in, put an addition on, and instead of going, you know, taking that wall straight back and using the same siding, like blurring the lines of what's old and what's new, we have, you know, recommendations to offset that wall just a bit, so you know where it changes from old to new. So it's, you know, it's distinguishable. Where's the old, where's the new? That's an example of a, you know, trying to find something that's compatible yet differentiated, which is one of the standards.
There's like a national guidance on compatible change to historic buildings. And we often have early conversations too with architects who are being brought on for home alterations to provide some preliminary guidance before people get too far down in their, you know, into their project details. So I feel like the Palo Alto Planning Department tries to help at various steps along the way if a property owner who has a historic resource wants to make changes.
Sorry, just ask, let me follow up on that, sorry to take too much time. So, I mean, from a practical perspective, if you already think the home that I own is old, if it's on the registry or not, am I still gonna effectively have to deal, basically leave the street facing sides the same? Is that, I mean, I'm not sure if you're allowed to just give me an honest answer, but is that effectively the situation that I'm in today, regardless of the home they own?
Don't tell the
registry?
truth.
Well, so are you on a corner lot or an interior lot?
Yes.
Okay, so you have two street sides.
Right.
So, you know, one of those street sides may have more what they call character defining features.
Mhm.
Maybe the street side, we call it, may not be the main entrance, may have, you know, if depending on how old it was, maybe it had like servants' quarters at the back, this kind of thing. I mean, we've seen many examples of homes that have portions that were less fabulous, you know, and maybe some of those are less character defining and can be modified more than, so you're lucky in that you have a corner lot. So I would say there's probably part of one of those street facing, I'm just guessing, facades that might have.
Regardless
Right.
of being on a list, on the historical register. That's my question.
Yeah.
Is if your house is old and you have something that someone could consider to be a unique feature, regardless of being on the list or not on the list, effectively that feature would effectively need to remain. Because the city wouldn't approve getting rid of it.
I think what
Is that a fair statement?
asking is, since it's already been eligible, I mean, it's already been determined to be eligible for the historic register, then it's already a flag on it that it's gonna be reviewed in more detail. And as I understand it, the reality is if you're on our inventory, then you actually get some perks. But one way or the other, the house has already been determined to be historic, not just old, but historic. I love my old house. When my neighbor touched it, but I think that the difference is that being on the inventory is going to give you some advantages, but not being on the inventory is going to make you less historic. So you'll still be subject to CEQA, right?
Well, so now we get into it. We have some applications in the city that are not discretionary. In other words, not if you're proposing a new 2-story addition or adding 150 square feet or more to the second floor, we have this process called the individual review. And that's a discretionary. In other words, it's not something that's just a building permit. It involves the planning side of things. And so once you're subject to CEQA with a discretionary review process, then we're looking at things more. If you're just coming in for a building permit, we probably get some consultation going, but to help you do the thing that's best for the historic resource, but it's a different process entirely. It's not a discretionary, so CEQA does not kick in.
So it depends on what you want to do with your project.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
your property.
depends. I mean, if you want to come in and tear down a home, just say, I want to come in and tear this down. We have a policy and in our comprehensive plan that says, let's make sure this is, what is this home? So your home, we already know it's eligible for National Register unless something is found in this survey that says, oh, well, there was something that happened in 2006, and it shouldn't even be on this list anymore. So if it's still on the list of eligible, then I guess come in and ask us if there's something you want to do, and we'll talk about it. See what you have.
Specifically express the difference between having been identified and then being on the inventory.
Yes. Being on the inventory would mean you're subject to the Palo Alto Municipal Code, Chapter 1649. It's a not very good ordinance that is historic preservation ordinance. So the way the ordinance is now, it is very loose, and there's not a lot of consequence for most historic homes. Put it that way. Category 1 and 2 homes throughout the city are thought of as significant. And so that is a designation, category 1 and 2, that would, we would have a look, and there's, if you want to demolish it, there's a process that you can come through and demolish it. But we'd rather, it's in the code
I know.
about demolishing historic resources. There's a process. It's a demo delay or some kind of thing. Yeah. We don't get a lot of category 1s and 2s that are requested to be demolished. So it doesn't happen with regularity.
But they could be, say.
Yes, there's a process to do it. But I'll go back to saying I didn't finish my sentence. We have a policy that says we can't just issue a demolition permit. You have to come in with the replacement home. And your replacement home, if you're coming in with a 2-story replacement home, you're subject to the discretionary review process. And so we'll take a look and say, oh, let's see. I guess you need an EIR. If you're coming in with a 1-story home, then we don't have, if you're not a category 1 or 2 and you come in with just as you are now with the eligible, and you come in with a 1-story home, this is the loophole where we don't have that capability.
Okay.
But we can't issue a demolition permit without a building permit to replace the home with
Understood.
something else.
Yeah.
I'm a property owner and I would like to get clarification. Probably my home is a historic resource. We know that because the form was submitted. Now, that entitles me to some benefits already. I can be part of the historic building codes. That entitles me to that without even being on the Palo Alto register. They're getting the extra square footage, you must be on the Palo Alto register, and you can get 250 square feet, but you have to then sign that off forever as being historic. What I would like to have you identify is a list of things that of benefits that you have now just as being a historic resource, which you already have some of those, versus the additional benefits that we would get by being on the historic Palo Alto historic inventory. And there are additional benefits, but there needs to be some clarification to understand what it is we're giving up. Second point I would like to make, it follows up really what in this whole process does the homeowner have in terms of, I really like my house, I want to be on the register, versus I don't feel like I really want to, and yet I'm being overruled by the council and they say you're going to put it on because the process says you must put it on. Now, is there anybody get clarification on that, or is it just still up in the air? We don't really know.
The mayor's right there.
Well, okay.
She may not, she has not been through this. I have not been through this. This is a first for most of the people in this room. I think we have experts here that have seen this in other communities.
It's a first, but it's not really a first to follow up because they did go through this process 22 years ago. And there was an election that said, look, we we respect property owner rights.
Right.
No, I'm not saying I fall in that category because I love my house and would like to see it historic. On the other hand, I have co-owners who say, well, I don't know.
Sure.
So I'm looking for clarification as to how the council might handle this.
Yeah, and I don't know how they'll handle it, but they do have options. I mean, we can certainly, we are a CLG, certified local government, in good standing. Every year I turn in this is maybe irrelevant to most people, but what it means is that we have obligations as a certified local government. The city could decide that it no longer wants to be a certified local government and give up historic preservation. That's an option. If the council decides that's what they want to do, they can do it. But while we are tasked with our responsibilities as a certified local government, we get grants for things. We had that standing like other cities that are similar. We could have a Mills Act program if the council so chose to approve a program. We've talked about it for years and years at the HRB, but we haven't brought it forward. That's the kind of thing you can do if you're a CLG, certified local government. If you're not a certified local government, you don't get a Mills Act program. What a Mills Act program is that your question? It's where you have a contract with the city for 10 years time frame that's renewable every 10 years, right? 10 years, where you get a break on your property tax. Now, in the city of Palo Alto, there's been talk of a pilot program for Mills Act where, and some of the board members in the room can tell you more, but where it would be linked, the tax reduction for property tax would be kind of linked to making improvements to the home. So in other words, you don't pay the county tax, you instead put that money into improving your home and keeping it, repaired, in good repair.
Does the city standing prevent it from putting a statement saying, as the state does now, that it does require that the homeowner consent to this rather than being simply a councilman side?
We don't have anything that I'm aware of in our chapter 1649, which is historic preservation chapter of our municipal code. I have not found anything in there that says that the property owner must consent like they do at the state level. So there's nothing in our ordinance that says that, but
Would that be put in?
there's nothing in our ordinance that says that the property owner must give permission for the city to designate their property or nominate place on the inventory. I have not found anything in the ordinance that says that.
That'd have to be, probably a whole other process to update that ordinance language.
That is, yeah.
And I wanted to just clarify that a certified local government is a designation program with the California Office of Historic Preservation. So it's a state, it's a relationship with the state office, and for cities to qualify, they must have a historical commission, a historic ordinance, continue to have like a work program to work towards historic preservation goals. And then in exchange, there are opportunities to receive grants from the California state government to be able to fund some of these efforts. And there may be some other benefits as well, but it's kind of a pledge in a way. And so there are, a city could decide not to be a certified local government anymore, but I don't know that many do. I think once they put the effort into becoming one, they want to keep it.
I think we're conflating the conversation a little. I think that the city does have, right now the authority to make something historical. I think we're asking about some corner cases. We're not saying stop Palo Alto from being ability to do that. I think we're asking what authority there is regarding whether residents are forced to be historical status. That is a subset of that whole category. We're not saying wipe out Palo Alto, wipe out all the tax benefits, wipe out. We're just asking for the situation we're in right here, the 130 something houses or what have you. What I understand is that the city council would have to vote that forces the residents to do it. That is what I'm hearing. Is that incorrect? Or not?
What I'm saying is the city council would have options that include not designating anything to the register,
Yes.
to our local register through putting some of them on the register after hearing and seeing all the materials placed in front of them, including, protests by
Right,
all the property owners decide they don't want to be on for whatever reason. That's down the road. We're in a process right now where we're looking to see which ones are still eligible. We're having conversations with people
I
and
think you can understand.
sure.
Anybody in Palo Alto, your home is probably the most consequential asset you own. And that is why we can't help but think further down in December, we look,
Yeah.
I understand where you guys all are, we respect that process. But we can't help but look 4 months from now, we're gonna have to go through a lot of anxiety over the next 4 months. As we work out this process, it's logical to ask the question, and maybe
Sure.
go to council now, are we gonna be forced to do this? Or do we all have to go through 4 months? That's what
No, I
I'm
don't-
getting out
yeah.
of the conversation.
I think within the next couple of months, we'll have, more knowledge of which properties. If you own a property that you wish would not be considered for the inventory, maybe you'll be surprised and you'll be happy in the next 2 months because we'll find out where it stands. If you know more about your property, I don't know which property you own, you may know more about it and you think it is likely to be still valid, still eligible. I don't know what your situation is, but
I think that's what we're all poking around to
Yeah.
understand what the envelope is. That's what the question was asked.
Not all
Right.
this,
Not all of us.
I
people
think
that are-
mine should be on that inventory now. I know, well, I am, and they're like, wait a minute.
I think my question is, what is the authority of the HRB in this process? Are they, do they have any authority?
We don't recommend anybody.
So
we
you could
recommend
recommend that everyone except one house wants to be on it. Can HRB listen to all their hearings, all the subsetted hearings, and then decide, there's only 5 houses people reject to be in historic, so we recommend that the 125 go on historical and not defined. I'm not saying you're gonna do that, I just wanna know what.
I don't think we would look at it that way. I mean, I think that we would take the owner's opinion into consideration.
That's my question,
Yeah,
and so that could be part of your recommendation.
yeah.
Okay, that's my question.
I mean. These are. We live in a weird age and it's moving really fast. I don't know if you have kids, but mine is starting to have kids and. I think it's really important to have a sense of where we've been and know that the world has not been moving at double speed. Since the beginning of Palo Alto, that when Palo Alto started, it was fairly slow. And I just think that it's really important for all of us to be able to walk through Professorville or walk through our neighborhood and have a sense that there will be a tomorrow. Because some days watching the internet, that's not what you get. So I think our historic buildings have a really strong message and I'm surprised that, I'm not surprised that people don't want their own house to be designated historic and preserved, but I am surprised that they don't recognize that almost all of us have some strong bond to our physical environment and that our historic house, other people's historic houses in our neighborhoods are really important to us. So I think that, it's a community concern.
I don't think I don't feel that it's at all, I'm against.
No. I wasn't responding.
Okay, I thought you were responding to me now.
No,
I live right near the HP house, I mean, I have the buses and everything, but I expect that they're interested in that house.
yeah. No, I just think that, it's easy to look at our own properties, but when we look a little further, it's easier to see more clearly, I guess.
I think, I think the challenge is, it's been said several times, is you didn't buy a historical property for whatever reason, people buy historical properties, fantastic. But some people don't buy those houses for a reason, and then to be required to do it, that's the anxiety. So I think it's a corner case.
We've had, just to be clear, the city of Palo Alto has had the parcel reports. I don't know. We've had the information that these were found historic in 2000 on our system. So people that have bought before 2000 may not know, but people that bought after 2000 should have known that they were already found eligible for the National Register because it is on our system. So if anyone talks to staff or looks at the webpage, they've been shown that way.
Yeah, I would say that eligible is a category different than required to be on the list, that's all.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
distinction.
But it wouldn't be an unknown when they purchased the property after 2000 that this is a historic resource.
Yeah, but buying a house and saying I could be required and forced with this another jump, that's all. That's, I'm giving you the homeowner perspective.
Sure. No, that's why we're.
The housing office perspective.
I have another question about what is the city's responsibility about assuring that a house, once it is on the historic register, is kept up in fine condition as when it was first put on the register? Is there any requirement by the city to assure that that house will remain in good condition?
No,
Okay, so that means the owner can do whatever they wish once it is. If they let the house run down,
they can let their house run down to the point where it's a code enforcement case, weeds or what have you, falling down, people coming to live there, homeless off the street. I mean, that starts to be a code enforcement case. So I would say not as far as that, but there's not going to be when was the last time you painted your house? It looks like your house or your roof. We don't come out proactively and say you need to keep your house looking like a museum. We don't do
there are
that.
2 cases, I will refer to them, but we know that there are 2 cases where houses were left to be run down, were taken off the register and demolished, even though they were originally on the register.
Yes.
And so
There's no demo by neglect ordinance in the city of Palo Alto. Some cities have an ordinance like that. We do not.
I don't disagree with what you said, except that there is a maintenance aspect to the city code that is supposed to keep buildings, no matter whether they're historic or not, from becoming, dilapidated like that. There is a maintenance aspect of the city code. I think some of what might be helpful, as I hear comments here, is to show examples of, and maybe you're going to do this next time. Like this house is historic. Here is what it would look like before the project was proposed. Here's what it looked like afterwards, because there may be. You mentioned this, Christina, that the preservation ordinance doesn't control anything that goes on inside a house. I mean, there's sometimes people think like if it's historic, you can't remodel the kitchen. You have to keep the fireplace exactly as it is. That sort of stuff. That isn't the case, and it isn't like a house is frozen in time. Alterations are allowed that, as you were talking about too, that like can be on the non-street facing side especially. And, it's not like homes are frozen in time. I think that might be what some people are thinking, because there's a, I don't know what the word would be, but there's a supposition, I guess, that if you're historic, it means frozen, that you have a museum house, and that's just not at all what the situation is. And if I misspeak, correct me.
Yeah.
Can you be, so you've accentuated the positive with the incentives, and I'm with all people. I love my house. I spent an enormous amount of money to actually fix it up from the state it was when this photo was taken. And it's like, we totally preserved it. Even though, and I'll tell you all the ways in which the information is wrong, because I actually have the better information about the historic value of it. But can you be absolutely clear on the disadvantages of being on the register? Like, okay, so, I'm getting that there is a more stringent individual review. If somebody wants to and it's not going to be me, but like a future owner who I might want to at some point sell to. How are they screwed by it being on the
Okay.
No, it's literally
I
what's the disincentive?
will help answer that.
Yeah.
So the individual review process, first of all, is a discretionary process for 2-story homes, new 2-story homes, second floor additions of greater than 150 square feet to an existing home, that's a discretionary review process that involves planning, taking action. Building permit only projects such as interior, gutting a house, changing every single thing on the inside, modifying the exterior, adding a single story addition. Those are building permit only. So if you're now a category 1 or 2, and you come through with a building permit to add on to your property, we would involve our consultant to help look at the building permit plans and help that be consistent with Secretary of Interior's. So that's, I don't know if that's screwed, it's a process.
So one difference is that if you're applying for just a building permit, it still goes through a review process.
It is, we
Planning.
include, no, actually, we haven't been doing that. We've just been doing building permits, but we include, because we do not have expertise on staff, we reach out to our consultant and they take a look at, how that addition is going and offer some suggestions about how to make it better and fit the Secretary of Interior standards.
So there's a time issue. Does it cost you more money? Are you paying for that?
We haven't been passing that cost on to the building permit applicants. We have not been.
So so you have less certainty. You might be asked to change something in order to preserve the historic heritage.
You might be asked to, instead of, putting these wildly different windows over here that face the street, that'll kind of remove you from our inventory. You would be counseled to maybe select a different window style.
When it comes to shove, you deny the permit, or you say fine, but you're not playing nice, or.
Well,
yeah,
I'm just trying to think in my experience. We haven't actively removed properties from our inventory because they've gone off and done something unlike what we requested.
So someone could put in horrible windows that don't match. That would be.
It happens.
Allow that. Okay, so they would. Just I want to be really clear. So you counsel them. You say, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
Right.
But you wouldn't stop them if they really wanted to. You couldn't stop them. No, I'm thinking, what are realtors gonna, what's the?
Well, sure, realtors, people that are making money on selling and buying houses, that's a whole different ballgame, because they don't want to hear it's historic at all. They don't, they don't want to have to explain anything more than what they already have to explain. Realtors don't like to explain stuff beyond what they absolutely have.
The reality is that, in fact.
Sorry, am I offending you?
There's a realtor in the room.
Oh, okay.
But
It's not me.
Okay.
That would be me.
Sorry, but let's acknowledge realtors. I don't envy all of the paperwork and the disclosures that they have to go through to sell a property. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to be disparaging of a realtor, but there's a lot there. And I think adding historic onto it can sometimes be frustrating. We get a lot of calls from realtors.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, if I'm looking to sell a house that has this designation, other realtors are going to say, oh, no, steer clear. But if the reality is that if you really want to be pig-headed about it and push that through, you can, then that's actually worth knowing.
Could be positive. You get consultation, design work.
Oh, yeah, no, personally, I'm looking at that. I want to know what are the negatives here?
We try through it's been, a lot of conversations, right? Yeah. To try to help people understand the benefit of having a beautiful house that isn't, a bastardization, if you will, of what it used to be, that would wreck its integrity. We try to have those conversations. We have a 7-member HRB that is here. We've had, study sessions, again, free for the property owner to come and, come early and say, hey, I'm thinking about wrecking my house. What do you guys think? And they can say, well, you could wreck it differently if you did this, and maybe it won't be wrecked. So.
Are there plaques that it's on the National Register? Did you put, I've seen.
Yeah, they're
all over the world.
so part of the Palo Alto Historic Association, I think, gives out.
Past Heritage
Pa-
gives out plaques for houses that are more than 100 years old.
Whether or not they're on the inventory.
Right, yeah.
It's nothing to do, it's not, I speak for past, it's nothing to do with the city, state, or federal government.
And there's no plaque program as part of the National Register. I think some people decide they want, it's generally honorary to have your property listed, and the documentation is on the National Park Service website if you go through the full process of getting your property listed on the National Register. And so I think some people want to be able to share that honorary designation with others, so they may order their own plaque and put it up that says that, but it's not technically part of the program.
There was a mention during your survey that there's a certain number of houses that are no longer fitting or whatever. And then is there a reason why we have to wait till September to get told which houses you've already kind of put into categories? There was actually one of the presentations also that showed us a list of the qualifying list versus verified, questionable eligibility, blah, blah, blah. I mean.
Oh, that was back a year ago with the HRB that members that had gone out earlier, a year ago or
Yeah,
so.
and in her slide, she
Okay.
said that there were
Oh, I see.
10 that they.
Yeah, there's some that have been demolished and then some that have been significantly altered.
Right.
And I think we're comfortable with the ones that have been demolished, but we could definitely say what those are. I think if you own one of those properties, you probably know.
Yeah, let's worry about that. It's not ambiguous.
The question with the 10 that have been significantly altered, some of them were found significant for the fact that a significant person lived there. And so we have to go through the exercise of, does this building look similar enough to when that person lived there that they would recognize it as their own home, is often one of the exercises you go through. So in a couple of cases, there's like a large second story addition on a couple homes, and I think they probably wouldn't pass that test. But we just haven't gone through that process beyond like me being in the field, making that gut assumption. And that's something that I would rather check before announcing publicly. So that list, I think, is forthcoming. I don't think it will take us long to go through those 10 properties.
I think it's just to build on his question. I think what's a little puzzling in terms of the stories we hear is that you want to do something in your house, it's historically, you're kind of told, no. I mean, if you're doing a metal roof like what we've done. And then on the other hand, we'll get it reviewed and then the character still could be retained, even though you did all these things that probably would have never passed the consultation. So it's confusing, on the one hand, well, if they made changes, that's fine, as long as it made, we will evaluate and say it's integrity. But then when you propose these changes, it's kind of no. And it's just, it's confusing, right?
Yeah, it's not simple.
It's like, you're not in here, but then it's like, part of our desire not to be on the list is because we're told we kind of need it here, so it's a mixed message a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
No one here would say any of this is an easy thing, right? There's the yin and the yang. There's the value of being historic. There's the not value of being historic. That's, I think we're hearing, can we just see a spreadsheet? Can it be just simplified? And it can't always be simplified. But certainly tell us the addresses of your homes. We'll start the dialogues. Anyone that wants to start talking about the address and reach out to Isabel, then we can understand where you're coming from. I know you've come to several HRB meetings to express concern, and thank you for coming again today. And let's start to have conversations about the addresses.
Have we exhausted the downsides? So there's the permit. Well,
No.
I want to be really clear. So there's the permitting. Permits can take longer. You're subject to, if you want to trash it or massively alter it, you're going to go through an individual review anyway.
Well, no,
That's
only if you have a 2-story.
Yeah, 2-story. Okay. You're going to go through an individual review anyway, at which point the city might say, hold on, please do X in order to save it.
If you're demolishing your home, and you're a category 1 or 2, there's in our current really bad ordinance, it's talks about demolition delay. So there's a delay to demolish a category 1 or 2 home.
So that's but if you wanna like just make it bigger, I understand the incentives.
Right.
But there's a discussion process that you
Yes.
would need to engage with city.
Yeah,
in terms of-
historic or not, you
Yeah.
have that discussion process, no
right,
matter if it's a brand new home, you have that process. It's called individual review. We have a preliminary meeting and then the formal application and,
And
maybe more
historically it
meetings.
does what? It just folds more people in, more opinions?
No,
or-
it's the same process, individual review for a two-story home
Right.
or a second-story addition to a historic home, let's say.
Right,
It's still the same process. People can come forward and request a hearing. We have a hearing. People can appeal that decision. It goes to the city council,
Right.
historic or not,
so being historic makes no difference really in the case of the individual.
for the process of individual review, no.
It does, okay, that's
There is another, it could be a plus or minus. The very controversial thing with the SB9 is that. SB9 is you can build two duplexes on your house and if you're.
We can-
Company cannot do it.
Yeah,
Well, that's
It's hard to evaluate the pros and cons.
that's is that right? So.
yeah, so that's my
you're-
next thing.
Okay.
Is SB9. So SB9 is a state law. We have, the city adopted an interim ordinance and we're going to the council May 15th or May 22nd now. To adopt a permanent ordinance that implements that state law. What that state law allows is lot splits. We call them urban lot splits. And you can take a lot that is not on a historic register. So your property is not on a historic register right now, so you qualify for urban lot split.
Right.
You could come in and split your lot 60-40, basically roughly, and put two houses there.
Right,
You can put more than two houses.
Right.
You could also, with what you have, come in and build an ADU and a JADU, so you can get
Right.
3 units on your house, on your property now without splitting it.
Right.
So that's the difference, is if you want a lot split and you're on our inventory, you won't be able to do that. Unless you do this flag lot split, which
Okay.
is an existing
interesting.
incentive, yeah.
Okay, so that really is a kind of take in a sense of the property rights, but because the state has given everyone these.
It's not as easy as you might think. I mean, I've looked at it, I think you have to that has to be your primary home for, you have to sign affidavits.
Right,
You can't have rented it the 3 years prior. So there's a bunch of,
you mean for SB9?
yes,
Right, yeah.
yeah. So there's
Yeah.
quite
But
a
if
list of
but if you-
things.
If you qualify for SB9, if your property is designated historic in Palo Alto, then you can't do the lot split.
You can't do the SB9 development or the SB9 lot split, but you might be able to do this other lot split. It's a flag lot.
But you can do the JDU. and
You
the-
can do,
the ADU
you can
and the
either do, yeah, if you're not gonna do a lot split,
Yeah.
you can have 3 units on your property.
And I have many oaks too, so. That's your problem. It's, and I
Oh,
have
you're right.
conversations about, it's which is another whole.
As a follow-up to that, you mentioned that the city's current historic code is not really great. Now,
Correct.
in 20 years ago, there was ordinance 4571, which was then voted down, and it was
Yes.
quite specific and quite comprehensive, but it was voted down, and the various parts were put into the present ordinance. Now, is the city considering updating that and changing it to be more strict as 4571 was? Or is there some plan so that it's going to change the whole character of the historic preservation scene in Palo Alto? Do you know of any?
What I know is that our comprehensive plan has a policy that says we should update our historic preservation ordinance because it is ineffective. Or it says, actually, this comp plan policy says we should evaluate the effectiveness of the historic preservation ordinance. So, maybe the council will find that it's perfectly effective the way it should be. But it's for staff and the HRB to take on as a project to review that ordinance and see where its strengths and weaknesses are and report that up to council. And then if council should choose to modify the ordinance, that would be a process and a public process at that.
Amy, why was there an election? Did the council approve it and then there was an election to pull it off?
So this is before I started working here. And I've been here 25 years, so it's very old news.
2020, 2000, wasn't it?
No,
Yeah. No.
it was so I started working here in 1998. And I think that's around that year was when there was an interim ordinance that was put in place. There was a staff that was bringing forward these merit, designations or something to the Historic Resources Board. And yeah, simultaneously, there was an ordinance that was being looked at and put in place. It's an interim ordinance. And then there was a proposed ordinance to replace that interim ordinance.
I don't think we even got that far. Did we actually vote on a real ordinance, permanent ordinance?
All I know is
Yes,
the
there
election.
was an interim ordinance.
There was an interim ordinance that was in place, and there was a proposed permanent ordinance that got a certain way. And then it went poof.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to understand process wise is did the council approve the ordinance and then the citizens did some circuit enough people to put it on the ballot, or what triggered it being on the ballot? Because it was voted down for your.
I don't remember.
I before I got here, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the history is in the books, and if that's important.
It's important in terms of what the. Just trying to understand.
Sure. Well, right now, there's no ordinance changes proposed. Anytime there's an ordinance in the city that the council adopts, there could be a referendum. We're a charter city and there's referendums, we've had them in the past, referendums of an ordinance. We had a referendum about a planned community ordinance that the council passed.
So you don't need an ordinance if you forced all the homeowners to go historic.
That's not an ordinance.
That's not.
Correct.
Okay.
That's a process that we go through, that's not an ordinance. It's just looking at each home or property it's not a home and bringing it forward.
I see. The other case, they were doing black, white ordinance that said anyone that's on this list.
It was a law that was either overturned or, just went up in flames.
Well, the ordinance outlines the process for nomination and who's involved with the HRB.
The one that we have in place.
Currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're going through the process that's outlined in the existing ordinance. We're not proposing to change.
Ambiguous about requiring the resident to be on if it's nominated.
Yeah, it's silent on that.
That's what I was trying to.
So I don't know if that other ordinance that went up in flames was specific about that.
It was, that's kind of, if you Google it, it's the bunch of.
It was very specific about you were given an extra 500 square feet. That number disappeared, and now in the current ordinance, it's 250 square feet. And there's no way to find out how that number went from 500 to 250.
And it was
But this is
such.
just part of the uncertain vagueness of how things happen.
It was, at that time, there were 7 too. It was a lot.
Well, yeah, the windshield survey that happened had a wide net throughout the city. And so the potentially eligible homes, there were 2, there was a study priority 1 and a study priority 2 list. From that was culled this 165. So those were thousands of homes that were about to be potentially affected by this new ordinance. So I think that got a lot of people concerned.
Later, actually,
Right.
windshield survey, because my recollection was that there was a lot of fear in South Palo Alto, but they were not houses that had been identified in any way, shape, or form. Because it was before we had National Register districts in South Palo Alto. So I think they were just, blanket scaring people. I don't think that individual properties had been identified at that point.
Yeah, I think that there were 2 levels of the argument. Articles. One is obviously people that have a house that could be affected. The other one was people that live the principle of your house into your house. So you didn't have to have an historical house to vote. You just voted on what you thought.
No, but there were definitely some. They're attacking to vote.
So I'm still, it's ambiguous to me about I don't know what the right language is, I don't use the wrong language, but we're not told they have to, but the council can vote that we have to be a historical home. I mean, even though it's not in the ordinance?
The ordinance is silent. So what that means is it's up to the city council as to what they want to do.
And that's legal, I guess I'm trying to understand, is that,
It's-
if the
yeah.
ordinance is silent,
The council can decide if they want to nominate a property with or without the owner's consent. That's what that means. It doesn't say what the rules are.
It seems highly unlikely if somebody's really dead set, they don't want their property on inventory. I
Was
can't
that the
imagine
case in
our
the past?
council Putting them there.
no, that wasn't, that's why that election.
Right, so the existing inventory was decided without.
The existing inventory from 1978,
Right.
I don't know what was happening way back then.
Right,
But in 2000, when this wide net was cast and many thousands of properties were potentially eligible.
Right.
Around that same time, there was this ordinance talk of a permanent ordinance that would have more consequences for if you were actually
right,
historic. So I think the combination of the survey at the same time as the ordinance
right.
got people fearful. And then when, however the consequence was, it just. So now we're just using the same old ordinance that was around back then.
Will you be updating FAQ to what was discussed here, the FAQ we've given?
The sordid truth is basically.
No, I realize some things are more gray, but I think there were some black and white answers to some things that would be relevant on the FAQ for people that weren't able to attend in person. I mean, I think, I'm not sure I got my question answered, which is the process that HRB makes the recommendation, or is the process?
I think I told you, you got it right.
Oh.
You created the process in your
Okay.
language about it.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was correct.
You're correct.
Okay.
So I mean, I think there are definitely advantages to putting more in those FAQs at the stage we're in right now. Like we could say, oh, in September, because you missed the meeting, we're looking at September as our next community meeting. If you want to know if your property is still being considered, please send an email and we'll get back to you.
Well, I
That
think
kind of thing.
that clarification is useful, so people understand they should go to the HRB. Part of that, hearing those reviews of your house, I guess.
We'll definitely be sending out notices each and every time somebody's property might be impacted or affected or, discussed. So, yeah, we'll see what we can do as far as general
Yeah, I
FAQs.
think we need the world piece of FAQ, but there's some
Right.
more just important in terms of
Right.
clarification about what's already on there, especially things that contradict each other on sites.
Like what you said, designation versus nomination.
Correct.
Mhm.
And it would be very helpful to know what is the consequence of being, for a homeowner, of being on that. Let's, what is the consequence? You have building permits get an extra layer of review. You are not eligible for SB9. I mean, I think that's really beholden for the
Right,
city to
and
be
it's
clear about that.
Sure, and it's hard though to give the context without a conversation, because information, someone's gonna pick out this thing and not read down here.
Well, but it's a list. It's like, these are all the things, these are all the consequences, and you can.
Right.
Link them to the law.
Yeah, I mean, or you can, I don't know,
I would second that. I think that's a very valuable thing to do.
You're screwed if you are on the list because, and then over here.
There's consequences of being on the list of this, and there
Right.
are,
A few cons, there's a few cons.
Yeah, and there's also positives that you get.
Well, maybe we would start with the positives, and then if they're still reading by the time they get to page 4.
Yeah, but
Because that's the thing is, I think we care about everyone and their properties, and we
Right.
want to have a good service to you about your property, come in, talk to us. What is it you want to do with your property? I mean, are you planning to sell it
But
next year?
That's not
I don't
really
know.
very fair, because I'm not thinking, I'm thinking 20 years out, I'm not
Yeah.
thinking now, I'm not.
Well, you might be
I have no plans beyond trying to build a garage,
Right.
which is a whole other thing, but, and not impacting historical or anything, and trying to build it actually incredibly in keeping with their building it. But what I want to know is if I want to move, how am I impacted by this in terms of what people will think of my house?
Yes,
And
that's
that is literally, I mean, that's
Right.
horribly potentially a matter of enormous amounts of money. I mean, and that's
Sure.
just a factor of the hideous real estate situation, but it's nevertheless the case that it is
Right.
actually a very significant financial consequence.
Sure.
And if people have it wrong about what the consequences are, and the sort of the word among the sort of real estate community is actually wrong, that's really important to communicate, because that would help, mitigate the sort of fear of being on the list. But I think you owe it to us to just make that very clear, like being on the list means this, you have
Sure.
this, you have this. I mean, I think that SB9 thing is really consequential. It's not, it's mitigated somewhat by the flag lot thing, by the fact that you can still do the ADU and the ADU. I mean, it's not, death sentence. And as you say, the law generally is fairly weak. You can actually demolish if you just want to be pig-headed about it. But I think it would be tremendously helpful, and actually might mitigate some anxiety amongst these relatively small number of house owners, that they're getting screwed here.
Can I mitigate somebody's desire? Because with a realtor in the room, I went through the same process, and so I looked for houses, historic houses that were being sold. And by Jove, I found 2 in Palo Alto. And they were commanding top dollar, $2,300, $2,400, $2,500 a square foot. Now it's true, they were remodeled on the inside of the hill and were beautiful from the outside, are large lots, and they timed the sale perfectly. Nevertheless, you can still do very well with a historic home, and it's just how you take care of it and how you love it. So,
Yeah, there have been,
Yeah.
this is always the fear that property value will go down, but there have been studies that that's not necessarily the case, including in historic districts as well.
That's also. Say, I'm still struggling with the SB9, but now is not with an SB9 scenario, you know what I mean? I think part of our issue is not what I want to do in my life, but it's how someone views my property. The world is changing. Whoever thought SB9 would happen? I'm not for SB9, but I am worried about how someone's going to view my property someday, 100 years from now, So that this is a little pushback on the studies. I mean, great, it's an apples to apples versus apples to oranges. You need to be more balanced about it. Because that we live in Palo Alto, unfortunately, and that's the consequence of the real estate. I'm sorry, I do want to.
I would
give a
love to
different
hear you say that to the country. We live in Palo Alto, unfortunately.
Well, I think it's because we have no land to put these houses, and therefore there's more pushback to build houses, and therefore we get forced to do it sometimes. Although afterwards.
No, it was just the phrasing.
Well, I wouldn't be in Palo Alto if I didn't love it. We live in 4 other cities in the Bay Area. We love it here, except what I'm going through right now through this process.
We'll talk. I just wanted to mention from the conversation and the process for nominating historic properties. This is part of the process, collecting the community input, and we appreciate everyone coming out here. And we do take your comments very seriously to either add it in a staff report or in our recent surveys. So the information collected today was very helpful to understand what information will be of value to the process in terms of educational component, or understanding the increase in property values, or understanding the further reviews that are available for additional counsel. Usually city staff or consultants kind of sit behind a table literally, or working on a project, but it's that fine tuning and working with the community that we add a level of detail and sincerity, understanding what properties would like to be included, what other considerations. I think from today's session. It was very valuable to collect everyone's input. And this is only the first meeting in the community. There are a second one planned, and there's also the public noticing periods when it does get presented to either the HRB or City Council. So I want to kind of calm the conversation a bit and reduce some worries that are here today, that you'll have plenty of opportunities to reach out to us, connect with us, discuss your properties or any other information you'd like to be made available. I think we can easily coordinate that in conversation. So if there's any other questions, I think we're all available.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
You, I want to do that.